Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. It's race week once again. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is coming up this weekend and it's the second real test for these teams to see what the competitiveness is looking like. Mercedes believe they're going to get significantly better this weekend compared to Bahrain given the different circuit characteristics, but also they've got some upgrades to bring as well, in addition to most of the other top three teams have more tweaks to their car over the upcoming races. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Firstly, on the Ferrari chaos that is currently ensuing. So we've talked about this story over the last couple of days, and it's continuing that Laurent Mekies, who was one of the key features, effectively second in command to Mattia Binotto while he was around, is looking to leave Ferrari. Seems like a lot of the individuals that were in favour of Binotto staying at the time are now wanting to go, and maybe there's going to be an entire cleaning of house over there at Ferrari, and maybe it's a good thing in the long term. There's an argument to say here that this is bad in the short term for Ferrari, but maybe Vasseurs going to entirely overhaul his team and everyone around him, and within a couple of years Ferrari might be in a better spot than they are presently, because a lot of these guys have been around a long time and oversaw the failure that Ferrari have dealt with over the last 15 or so years since Raikkonen won with Ferrari in 2007 the World Drivers' Championship. Since then Ferrari have been on a massive drought. The numbers in terms of race wins over the last decades pale in comparison to even what Verstappen has achieved in the last 2 seasons. So lots has got to change at Ferrari, and it is changing. There's going to be a reshuffle going on. There's been supposedly a gentle transition so far since Binotto has gone, but there's tension even higher up because Vasseur wants to make big changes, sweeping changes probably to the people that are in charge of certain positions, but he can't necessarily get the permission from the CEO, and that's where there's some friction there. And Vasseur might be realizing, you know what, this is a slightly more challenging job than I thought it would be, but I'm sure he probably knew that when he got into it in the first place. Also, rumours circulating that Charles has no intention of leaving Ferrari. Of course, we heard the rumours a couple of days ago that Leclerc had ordered a meeting with John Elkann, the president at Ferrari, to say, look, prove to me that this team's actually any good and it's going to work in the longer term, and you know, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But Charles, for now, the rumour is he wants to tie his future to the red team even further. He wants to become an F1 world champion as soon as possible, but you know, how much does he truly believe right now that Ferrari is the team to deliver that? He of course wants to do it with Ferrari, but the next couple of races are going to prove critical, and really this entire season, to whether Ferrari can get to be where they need to be going forwards. And look at these numbers, right? Verstappen in the last couple of seasons, 26 race wins, and this number is going to go out of control, I think, this season, to be honest. Ferrari, since 2014, the start of the turbo hybrid era, 21 race wins, and I think 14 of those were from one man, Sebastian Vettel. So it's not looking good for Ferrari. Things are changing internally. It might be a case of they have to step back to step forward, but is that going to be enough for Leclerc not to leave if other options arrive onto the table? Now, it's officially race week. This is a pretty good meme template, I think, here for Mercedes with the George Russell thing from the intro, and we believe, or at least we hope at the very least, that we might have a more competitive race here in Jeddah. Bahrain is generally a circuit, we saw George Russell say in the video yesterday, that exacerbates differences between the cars that are good at tyre wear, the cars that are good over the curbs, the cars that are good at traction, and have a very strong rear end of the car are very good around Bahrain. Other circuits have very differing characteristics, and Jeddah is certainly one of them, where top speed is key. Speed in higher downforce corners is also key though, and it's generally more front limited rather than rear limited. Front limited circuits are more like higher speed corner circuits. Rear limited are more like traction zones out of corners, where the rear tyres can get lit up if you, well, go on the power too heavy, for example. So people expect it to be more competitive in Jeddah. Red Bull say they think the competition is going to come back at them, and other teams are more confident. Ferrari say they're confident. Even Verstappen says he reckons Ferrari will be a challenge because they do now have more straight line speed. Last year Verstappen won at Jeddah largely because he had about 10 kph quicker in a straight line. Once he finally got past Leclerc, there was no, you know, Leclerc couldn't get him back because he simply didn't have the straight line speed, even though the Ferrari was faster in sector 1. The high speed sweeping corner section of the track in sector 2 and 3 are generally just big straights, where Verstappen was dominant last year. Could be a different story this time around because both Mercedes and Ferrari both worked over the winter on their straight line speeds so they can match Red Bull, which they pretty much can now, but do they have the perfect balance between efficiency? My expectation is Red Bull are going to be fastest in sector 1, and we'll see what happens after that. Now, Mercedes do have upgrades to bring, as do the other teams. Now, these are upgrades that Mercedes have planned for some time. They're probably small things, a few new parts they're bringing in, but we did even see last season that some small upgrades they made actually made quite a big difference to the car. Now, they've planned these for some time. I think they knew when they were building this W14 concept that arrived into Bahrain, and obviously at pre-season testing as well, that it wasn't going to be the fastest car. It wasn't the complete package. It was a concept to see if it didn't bounce. It doesn't bounce, and therefore that has given some optimism. There's no porpoising. The issues they had last year aren't quite there again, but it simply doesn't have the pace. It doesn't have the downforce and weather to catch up to Red Bull, given there's a massive gap there. They need an entire renovation of the way they design their car. That's what Toto Wolff seems to believe, but I think we'll find out more over the coming races. If they can close the gap a bit based on potentially track conditions, but also potential upgrades as well, then they might change their mind, Mercedes, on what they do going forwards. But it's obviously going to be a tricky question for them to answer. They've apparently got two concepts they're working within the wind tunnel. One of them might well just look like a Red Bull. One of them might be more of an evolution of what they've currently got, but regardless, it seems like the gap to breach was massive in Bahrain, but the team seems to believe it's not as bad as it appeared. Now, Red Bull, though, have upgrades to bring themselves. They're not bringing anything massive until Baku. They're bringing some new parts in Melbourne, so we're going to see the same car in Jeddah that we saw in Bahrain. In Baku, there's going to be a big upgrade, it seems, and apparently the team expects that to be even better, so we'll see how it goes. Ferrari, nothing much for Jeddah, apart from the single pillar rear wing, which was flexing all over the place. They're trying to repair that and make it work, so I guess that's the plan there. Mercedes, though, have some new parts. These are parts that have been planned for some time. The big upgrade for them is going to come in Imola, and, well, which direction they go, we'll have to find out over the coming weeks. But also Aston Martin, we can't forget about this team. Alonso had a podium. Stroll, you would imagine, is even in a better position now than he was a few days ago in terms of competing this weekend in Jeddah, so excited to see what he can come up with. There is, again, some small upgrades here for Aston Martin, but their big upgrade is arriving in Imola, as expected, with some of the other teams as well, the intention to optimize the current package from their perspective. So a few new parts. Now, Toto Wolff has said repeatedly that they're going to need some big steps to catch up to Red Bull. It's not going to, this change isn't going to make a massive difference for them, but it might be track dependent, right? And that's where we're really going to see, because I know that many have said the season's over after one race, right? We had the Red Bull 1-2. It was a dominant Red Bull 1-2, but track conditions do vary, and this circuit is very different in many ways to Bahrain, and maybe that's good for Ferrari, maybe it's good for Mercedes, maybe it's even better for Aston Martin, maybe it's better for Red Bull, and the season is done and dusted. But this is one test, right, just to see whether the order of the cars that we saw in Bahrain is replicated here in Jeddah, or whether it's slightly different, and whether the competition in, at least behind Red Bull, is even more fierce than we thought it might be, because, Aston Martin may be better here, they may be worse. It's kind of difficult to say. Now, Toto Wolff is pretty confident they're going to be better in Jeddah by a significant margin. He says Bahrain is very rear limited and very abrasive asphalt, and that's probably the weakest point in our car. If you look at it from that perspective, maybe it gets better. Certainly when it comes to front limited tracks, we will be on a much, much better pace, as Jeddah generally is. So, of course, the pace wasn't particularly good. He's very clear that it's not a matter of finding 3/10 and polishing the car up. They need a major overhaul. They set themselves high targets. They achieved them, but obviously they weren't high enough compared to what Red Bull have been able to accomplish. He says it's an interesting challenge. So pretty much confirms that from their perspective, they should be better in Bahrain, in addition to some small upgrades they're bringing. Whether that unlocks that much more time, and the issue is, right, is that let's say they were a second behind in race pace to Red Bull, as they pretty much were, even if they close up 3/10 based on maybe a small upgrade here, but also the track suits them a little bit better. Did Red Bull have more in the tank? They probably did. So we'll have to see what happens this weekend. But I'm hoping we get some evidence from either Ferrari, Mercedes, or Aston Martin that the season isn't just a write-off already in terms of who's going to win both championships. Mercedes seem quite confident that the recovery starts here and they will be able to make some progress this weekend. But we shall see in terms of whether those upgrades provide anything significant for Mercedes, or whether they will prove fruitless in the long term. Because if they are going to change their side pod concept, because the zero pods obviously they've failed to impress, let's say, since they arrived on the car, they're probably going to go at some point in the near future, and therefore do the upgrades they bring now to Jeddah not work when they change the concept? That's the problem with what Mercedes are trying to do, is that once you design an airflow project around the way the side pods currently work, any changes to those therefore mean you've got to redesign other elements of the car as well, certainly the floor design, and it makes things very complicated. So they've dug themselves a massive hole. They've got to dig out of it starting this weekend. But I'm very interested interested to see how Aston Martin can fare, because they were great around Bahrain. Was that just an outlier for them? Are they as good as they appeared in Bahrain? Because a track that did seem to suit them and Red Bull particularly well, with similar car characteristics for reasons that Christian Horner has made clear over the last couple of weeks. Of course, they hired 7 engineers from Red Bull to Aston Martin back in 2021 when they were working on these ground effect era cars. Maybe not a massive surprise, but if Aston Martin are still competitive there in Jeddah, it's very exciting. If they aren't so competitive, we might have a very interesting battle, because in Bahrain it was quite clear that Aston Martin and Alonso were by far the second fastest car on that weekend. Probably Alonso wouldn't have quite caught Leclerc if he didn't have the engine failure, but of course Alonso had a poor start and had to fight back from there. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing to mention here, that rumours are circulating that Aston Martin might apply to, well, join up with Honda. So Honda are looking for a team to partner with going into 2026. Red Bull have said, Honda, you wanted to go, now you're back again. We're going with Ford, right? It's going to be Red Bull, Ford, whatever's going on there for 2026. So Honda still need a team. Whether they could buy AlphaTauri and become effectively a Honda Works team, or whether they partner with somebody. But, apparently Aston Martin could be a potential candidate to partner up there. And I think Williams and others will make their calls probably this season sometime as to what their plans are for the new engine regulations come at 2026. Thanks for watching as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time.